What if your legacy is defined by what is most meaningful to you? Good morning. Welcome to the Design Your Legacy podcast. I have the pleasure to introduce you to Tony Martignetti. He is a leadership coach and he gets to join us today to both talk about his leadership, but as well as his thoughts about his legacy, his art, and some other very juicy topics. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
It is my pleasure to host you this lovely morning. So, I thought maybe we could start with your story, or what is it that you are coming across when it comes to some of the problems that leaders are facing today as you are a leadership coach? Where would you like to begin our conversation?
Let's start with the story, and then we'll get into the second part. So, so yeah, let's start. I'll start from way back, and then I'll move forward. Sound good?
That sounds wonderful. Yes.
Yeah. So, my origins. So my parents come from. They're immigrants, and my dad came from Italy. My mother comes from Lebanon, and they came to. I live in Boston, and I grew up in a household that was all about hard work. The ingrained in me at a very young age that the harder you work, the more you become. There was some heavy programming there, but ultimately that has changed over the years to see how there's a different way to show up. And one of the things about my childhood that was interesting, and this is why I'm going that far back, is that I was an artist. I was actually celebrated as, someone who's a really good, solid artist who didn't necessarily paint and draw things that like every child would do. I was drawing paintings of rooms and environments, the emotional states of rooms and environments, which is odd, but it is something that when I look back now, I can understand that's who I was. There was something about that really connected to who I would become. And
And I just want to intrude for a moment. I think it's just absolutely so wonderful. And for any listener out there, Tony has a very inspiring Instagram page. When he travels, he highlights these amazing photographs of buildings that have stood the test of time. And as we expand the conversation in a moment regarding legacy and not just how buildings can stand the test of time, but also the impact of one's personal holistic legacy. We're going to broaden the conversation so it's beyond money and assets. But I just wanted to share that your Instagram page is so inspiring. So even if your parents had this survival programming growing up, because immigrants are told to work hard. My mother was
yeah,
an immigrant that came to America, and that is very much the cornerstone that they could own multiple businesses, but they will wake up early and they will work till the sun goes down and beyond 6 days a week.
yeah, 100% agree. And that's exactly the feeling that I had, and that sense of programming. But, we have to unlearn some of the things we've learned. And it's not, you have to appreciate and honor that, right? I think that's the reality of who we are. And the next real chapter for me was, you know, thinking, oh, I'm going to become an architect because that's, where I was headed. But then what happened was I ended up shifting gears because a lot of people in my life were saying, hey, you need to do something that's going to make you a living, get you, make good money. We don't want you to starve. And I decided to go pre-med. So I decided to go into medicine. But what really happened is I ended up shifting gears again because that wasn't really the path I was on, and ended up going into to work in biotech, in finance and strategy roles. So I spent most of my career working with numbers, analytical, very different than what I had expected I would be doing, which would be more that creative side of the mind. And I mean, I was very successful in that path. I created a lot of value, had a lot of great relationships, and people really said, "Hey, you're really good at what you do, but there's something unique about you that is different than what you're doing."
I
But
almost,
go
I'm
ahead,
sorry to
please.
interrupt. I almost wonder if it was like there was a spiritual part in you that wanted to evolve and grow more, and other people were noticing that, and it just became time.
Yeah, I think there's, and we may get into this a little bit later, but there's a sense of like a lot about who we are as individuals. Often, like peaks out at other people. We shine out a little bit of who we are, but we don't often know it because we just think we need to show up a certain way.
until it
We
gets mirrored back.
yeah, yeah. And so I think that's the one thing that's interesting, is that sometimes we feel like we need to show up a certain way because we think, well, I am in finance, so therefore I need to be X, Y, and Z. But the reality is we don't need to be that way. Don't need to put ourselves in a box and be so tight. Instead, we should be able to explore our multitudes. And that eventually is what ended up happening. I spent 25 years working in biotech and high tech, and eventually found myself at this place where I had burnt myself out trying to do these things that I wasn't meant for. And that's what had me leaping out of corporate and getting into this field of coaching, advising, and leadership development, and really led me to being here with you.
Yeah, I find that story just so deep and humane and profound, because it's a path that many people can find themselves walking down. Because people sometimes it's easy to put other people in a box, but that's not who we are. We're so much more than that if we choose to be that, and if other people choose to see it. So one of the things we're chatting about in the preamble is there was a part of you that was suffering inside, and you thought to yourself, what if I could make sure other people don't have to suffer like I have suffered? And whether that's having your growth be stunted, and we're going to talk in a moment about rising leaders and how
Mm,
they can then not be stunted, whether that's the leadership above them or the framework that they have to exist within or the path they have to walk. But I just thought it was so interesting that here you were, and you were just so intellectually smart, but there were other parts of you that needed to be seen, heard, and understood, and you were willing to take that risk. And I think you also mentioned that you had collaborated with a coach who saw those parts of you
yeah.
so that you could also be happy as a whole human being.
Yeah, and I wish that I had that collaboration a lot earlier in my life. I mean, this was happened at the end of my corporate career and not early on. And that's one of the things that I feel like we need to have that opportunity to work with people who can help us see ourselves more fully earlier on, not wait till, we're later in our years and feeling like, okay, now I'm finally getting it. And now I'm ready to make the leap. But I 100% agree. There is a sense of like, we need someone to reflect back on us what we don't see. And that's where coaches and advisors and different people who can be come on our journey, they help us to see our beauty, to see fully who we are, because we don't. Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you for being so vulnerable.
of course. This is what I do now. It's something that I had to learn to be. I think for so many years, I held myself back from being vulnerable and sharing fully.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Whether it's a corporate setting or corporate America or the business world, we've been conditioned to not show weakness. You can't have that weak link in your armor. You can't have them see you sweat and all those other expressions. And yet then we find ourselves in this container where we can't breathe. And then we wonder, you know, gosh, why is there something missing? I feel like I'm trapped in this life, even if the money is great.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that. I just want to go off on that for a moment. Is to say I'm delivering a TED talk in a few weeks, and it's called "Don't Check Yourself at the Door," and it has elements about how to create deeper connections in the workplace. And it really, at the center of this talk is this element of, how do we share more of who we are that we often hold back, because we are holding back a lot of who we are, and myself included. That's, I think, why I really kind of resonated with developing this talk, is because I wanted to make sure that even if it's little things, the quirky little things that we think are not important, they might add a lot of value with how can we connect with other people. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can all grow and all breathe and all be
Yeah.
ourselves and not
Yeah.
feel like, go ahead.
We carry a lot of weight around, trying to hold up that baggage of like, well, if I show them that I'm something more than who they think that I am, then I will let down that guard. The reality is that's a lot of weight to carry. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's because you're kind of like, oh, I know you're a male, but I think of like a woman who has to wear a corset, and it's like, hold it in and keep it in. And then it's like at the end of the day, that woman's exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%. Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
So one of the things also that I mentioned before we started recording is sometimes our parents can take us only so far. And then if there are those parts of ourselves that need to be developed and nurtured, then we have to go out into the world and find those coaches and other thought leaders that can help walk us down a path that they have walked before. So we know that both that it's safe, but also that where it can be evolved into, and that the next step of that journey, because again, our parents might have wanted to, but if they
Mhm.
were just like in survival and we're in a new country and we have to make the bills so we can make sure everyone is fed at the dinner table every day, then they sacrifice that, even if that was at the expense of their own soul.
Yeah, there's something what you just shared is really powerful because there's a sense that like the old quote, like, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. They did something really powerful to get us here. So we can't diminish, we have to honor and really kind of value that, but then also build from that. And that's what I think legacy is all about, is a sense of building on something that's already there and then doing something really beautiful from there. And know that they can only carry us so far, right? The past can only carry us so far. Like, can you imagine if prior generations had some of the things that, like the technologies and the things that we have today, what they would have been capable of, and then what we would be able to build from that, right? It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Before I go on to the next question, I think it would be so beautiful if one day you came to the dining room table and you brought up the topic of legacy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because normally
Absolutely.
we expect our parents to bring it up,
Mm,
and then if
yeah.
yeah, and if the child does, whether the child is like 40 or 50 or whatever the age is, that would be a really dynamic conversation because the parents could say back, "Well, Tony," and actually have a lot to say about it, but they were always probably shy to bring it up.
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe there's some parts of them, like when you think about people when they talk about legacy, there's some sense of like some embarrassment or maybe shame that people hold, that like they didn't do enough. But in reality, the people who are, on the receiving end of legacy often look at it and say, wow, like, you don't know how much you've done. Like, you don't appreciate all the things that you've done, um, because you don't see it. It's like we were just talking about a minute ago. Like, when you're on your journey, on your path to getting where you are, like, you don't appreciate who you are. The other people who are the recipients of your light, let's call it. I don't want to be losing people along the way, but your light that you shine is something that's really beautiful that people experience, but you don't realize it. Much like past generations don't often see how amazing that they are, it's the recipients of that who really value it.
Yeah, I let me piggyback on that. And I know we're freestyling
Please.
this moment.
I
I
love
think
it.
good, good. I think sometimes people there's limiting beliefs that come up, and in that subject of self-worth, if somebody doesn't believe that what they have to share is good enough, they won't put it down on paper.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is so unfortunate because I've often talked about I had a great grandfather during the Great Depression on my paternal side. He was an insurance broker actually in the Massachusetts area because they came
Oh,
from Worcester and Boston, that whole area. And he, I wish he would have written down his top values, his top guiding principles, his top 5 to 10 best life and business lessons, as well as spiritual lessons. And he
yeah.
never did it. And a part of it is that he didn't know. And I think another part of it was that he never thought somebody would want to read that hardcover coffee table book. And so he never set aside 6 or 12 months, let's say it would have been a weekend or one day a week, to write it
Mm,
down. And so it
yeah.
just passed with him.
Mm. It's interesting this topic we've gotten into, I think, is really interesting because one area of study that I've gotten into as I've become a coach is constellation work, which is trying to look back into the family history, and we can also do this inside of organizations. But this idea of looking at where is there potentially trauma or issues that have not been resolved in the past, and oftentimes it's because we just haven't gotten into the conversation or really dealt with it. So I think it's really important sometimes to just open the conversation and have that before it's too late, before you move down this path of like losing loved ones and not understanding really what impact they had on you.
Yes, and
You know?
how that individual dealt with it, because that's one of the things that is so rarely talked about. So then if another member of the family, even the next generation, has to deal with like anxiety or depression or something, where is the conversation of how the prior generations faced it, processed it, and came out the other side? Everyone's all tight-lipped and they don't want to talk about it. And that's the number one thing that needs to be talked about is how did you deal with those challenging moments and those difficult conversations to get through to the other side, because everyone is going to be tested, but then not enough people are sharing notes.
Yes, yes. We need to pass down that knowledge. It's that, just like in companies, institutional knowledge is important. Not to say that you should always do things the way they always were done, but there should be some way to pass down the lineage of what had been done in the past and how can we ensure that we're honoring and then moving from that. It comes to this concept which I often talk about, which is transcending and including, which comes from Ken Wilber. He's a philosopher, but I think transcending and including is an important aspect of how we move through life. We have to include our past, but we have to transcend it as we move to the next chapter. So we understand, how do I want to make sure that I'm growing to the next level of my existence?
Yes, and yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, speaking about knowledge that needs to be shared, whether it's institutional, whether that's within corporate America or a family business or whatever business unit or family unit that is,
Mhm.
here's my first question I wanted to bring up to you. What is a key problem you see your clients facing today? And how does the power of coaching affect the outcome? And I'm bringing up this question because a lot of times people who don't know about coaching need to watch coaches interact and break it down so they can know that it's not this foreign concept where only executives get coaches, or what exactly is this coaching thing about?
Yeah, I love this question, and thank you so much for bringing it up because there's so many ways that we could approach this. But what's top of mind for me right now is a sense of working with people who are on the rise into the in the organization. Rising leaders is a focus area of mine, and what I've been noticing is that companies invest a lot of money and effort into building those people into the great next leaders. The problem is that they don't fully commit all the way through to ensuring that they get there. The analogy I often use is, you're planting a seed, but then you rob it of sunlight. And I think that's important.
Yeah, do
Yeah.
you think that's about control?
I think it's maybe just not thinking it all the way through.
Okay.
Right. Um, if you're going to have rising leaders and invest in them, make sure you're also thinking about, how are we mentoring them? How are we ensuring that there is sponsorship all the way through the top? Even if you have a great CEO or a great C-suite, make sure that there's no layer in between the C-suite and the rising leader that gets in the way, potentially stops them from being able to really embrace and catalyze what they're learning and what they're building, because that is where you start to have people say, well, I'm learning these great skills, but I'm not able to apply them. Or I'm feeling like I get to this point where someone's getting in the way and blocking me from being able to do the things that I really want to do. And therefore, the big problem that we're running into is retention, right? You invest and then they leave.
Okay. So do you think these next gen members that are rising leaders, do you think they realize it in their awareness?
To some extent, yes,
Okay.
because it comes through in a lot of conversations I have with the people I talk to, is a sense of like frustration, because they've built up all this exciting energy and this great potential, and awareness, and then all of a sudden they feel like, but I keep on hitting friction in these conversations, in these places that I'm seeing people who don't support what I'm building.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
interesting. I almost wonder if it's like, well, if they're key assets, but then if there's a fear of like, well, what if they grow too big?
Yeah. And
Because
the answer to that is, well, let's let them, because there should be no holding back people from getting too big, because that's what we need more of. We need better. We need leaders who are willing to embrace the challenges of the future, which they're right.
Yeah, that's so interesting because let's say a next gen leader is nurtured and they are just mentored really well. And then
Mhm.
what does the CEO or the shareholders think about that? If they're bringing in money and profits and great influence and market share, that's fantastic. But then what if they step on the toes of the CEO? What if there's a power dynamic shift? Because there's all these other
Yeah.
invisible strings that, yeah, we wanted to make you great, but if you're too great, what do we do with that?
Well, I think you bring in a very good point, which is to say, you can't, bring in someone and just say, hey, free range, just go out and just be this obnoxious and kind of like bullish leader. You have to make sure you're instilling a humility to leadership. Humble leadership is really an important aspect of making sure you know how to lead and how to lead people in a way that brings them along, and you understand that you don't have all the answers to every problem that you face. It's about really embracing a learn it all and not a know it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also a part of it where who can they bring along? So if their light is shining and that's wonderful, but if that becomes a threat to anyone within an organization or a family unit or a boardroom meeting, then that's a very interesting conversation then because if
Yeah.
they become more talented, let's say, than the CEO, then that's a very competitive atmosphere, which
Mm.
yeah, so if they can include the CEO, then that's fantastic. And I know you could say, but this rising leader, Angelina, is between the age of 35 and 45. The CEO is over age 55. So there's no way. But I do think it's interesting because today, sometimes it comes down to who has the best ideas. And there's a term now called expired experience. And so that could tick off the CEO. I'm just saying hypothetically. And so there's those power
Yeah.
dynamics.
Well, I think you're also bringing in an element that's to say is that we have something to learn from everyone, right? Even the CEO can learn something powerful from people who are the younger generations, and what they're when they start to have a voice and they're starting to kind of get more confidence and be able to share their voice, the CEO can learn from them to say, I love your perspective on this. And you know what? I honor that. Maybe there's something here that we need to kind of put into the dialogue of the C-suite, um, and making sure that that person who's on the rise understands and respects the other voices, that like just because this person may be 60, 70 years old, or whatever age they may be, that doesn't mean that their voice is any less than the up and comer. Everyone has to have this honor of all the voices in the room, no matter who they are, because diversity is what really makes the world more valuable in terms of the voices.
Yeah, and diversity makes a stronger organization. But sometimes,
100%.
Tony, there's toxicity, and I'm going to move on to the next question, so I stop talking in a
Please.
moment. But there is sometimes toxicity. There are some individuals that they don't want that change coming around, and they call those zero-sum negotiators. So
Yeah.
I think that some of the rising leaders could bump up against that, and they could easily say, "Well, no problem, we'll start our own company," and then that's a whole new set of skills compared
Yeah.
to staying within an organization in their executive presence. I mean, to go out there and to bring in the business is a whole other skill set. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think this is a good segue to other things we can talk about. But I think one of the things I'll say is that through my own podcasts, I've had many conversations with successful leaders, and oftentimes they share this idea that like, well, nothing ever gets done by going it alone. We need support in ideas coming from different places, and we need to make sure that like we're open to hearing the perspective of different people. If anyone wants to go out and start a new company, fantastic, but realize that you're not going to do it alone. There's going to be support from people along the way, even if you think that they're not necessarily in the room, they're in your head.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just playing devil's advocate because I know the reality out there sometimes with young leaders at companies and they're even just afraid to talk to upper management because they're told to stay in their place.
Yeah.
And that's an unfortunate thing with some corporate cultures.
Yeah. 100% agree. And I want to fight that. I mean, I just think that's the thing that we need to stop is this, stay in your lane, stay in your place. Like that is not what we want. As we started this conversation earlier on, we talked about being in the box. And, what we need to do is make sure people don't stay in anything, but they realize that we have to make sure we color outside the lines and move along in ways that, allow us to voice what we think is important, but also honor and respect other people and know that everyone has a voice to be heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you're holding space for that. So let me ask you the next question of what is it in your heart that makes you care to coach others when you notice a void in the human experience or within their personal development?
Yeah. Well, first of all, because I care deeply about what every person has something to bring to the world. In many ways, I feel like it's like my purpose, my responsibility to really ensure that every person brings their full selves into the room, whatever that room looks like. And so for me, when I find somebody who comes to me and they feel like they're holding back a part of them, I feel like it's my obligation to point that out and to raise that up, um, even if it's a bit uncomfortable for them, because I want them to feel as though they're coming to me and they're going to get the most out of the experience. So I hope this answers your question, but I think for me, it's about really ensuring that we bring what's inside out.
Yes, yes. Well, I think it's wonderful. And I know you also mentioned previously in your journey that because you had suffered, you didn't want someone else to stifle their own light. Yeah. And I might ask, go ahead.
Absolutely, 100%. I just agreeing.
Yeah. And I might ask you later about the tattoo you're going to get towards the end. But
Yes.
so, in the context of legacy, what do you see perhaps that in today's entrepreneurs and leaders could be holding them back and other obstacles that they're facing? And this is in the context of their legacy.
Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, it's a sense of like not knowing what they want their legacy to be.
Okay.
So it's important for them to kind of to say, like, what do I want my contribution to be? So I think that's one of the first starting points to be, and not allowing themselves to dream big enough. And I think that's another part of this, which is important. Oftentimes we settle, we tolerate. And one of the questions I often talk about with leaders and in different stages of their growth is, what are you tolerating? Because what you tolerate is what you're accepting in your life. And that's not good. What we need to be able to say is, what would I do if I could just allow myself to expand into a bigger picture? And when I do that, what am I willing to do next? Which is, I have this framework I call it expand your vision, narrow your focus. And when we expand, we look at a bigger picture. What's my bigger, possibility I could live into? And then when I see that, that is really thinking about what my potential legacy could be. And then narrowing the focus is saying, what is the things that are getting in the way of me creating that? How can I ensure I get rid of those things so that they don't distract me from being in that place?
Yes. What are some of the hardest questions you've had to ask yourself and or as well as your clients?
Oh my gosh. And I love this because, first of all, the tagline of my business is inspiration through honest conversations. And the first honest conversation you have is with yourself. And I remember what, really got me out of, the world I was stuck in is this, not answering the tough questions of like, who am I really? Who am I meant to serve? But, to answer your question more honestly here is a sense of like, what really lights me up? Yeah. And, I at first thought that, okay, well, I guess I should be doing what everyone else is doing, the same old stuff over and over again, because that's what gets results. But what I started to do is thinking about like, well, if I don't enjoy that, why do I do it? Right. Maybe I should do the things that light me up. And if I do more of it, I'll get better results.
I think that's amazing because you're challenging yourself. A lot of people won't even challenge themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of like, not to say that I'm this complete contrarian, but the idea of like, you don't have to do it all, because we often find ourselves trapped into this, like, well, everyone else is doing it, I should do it too. And then you start doing all the things that everyone's doing. That's a problem. Um, but it's about trying to find the things that work well for you and then being consistent with that. Yeah.
Yes. So what
So
has been one of the hardest questions that you've ever asked a client? Or is it just the fact that you're confronting them?
yeah, I think how are you getting in your own way? I think that's, it's not that it's a hard question. It's just that, like, people don't like to be told that they're getting in their own way,
Oh, sure,
right?
sure.
But we often are. I mean, let's be honest. If we weren't getting in our own way, we would be in a different place, right? But in a compassionate way, I'm really, trying to shine a light on the fact that, like, once we can break this pattern that you're in, then you can get different results. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's the idea behind this, is to get people to see that you can have a different effect, a different impact, but you have to be willing to accept that you're getting in your own way. It's not other people who are holding you back. It's you. So let's start there.
Well, it's interesting. Sometimes people can be addicted to comfort, and
Mm,
other times it takes tremendous courage for a
mm,
coach to ask those challenging questions
yeah.
because we live in a very polite world sometimes in
Yeah.
the sense of what people will say to one another's face. I'm not talking about all the divisiveness behind other people's backs through internet anonymity.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll tell you right now, this wasn't something you just kind of come out of the gates and be like, "Hey, how are you getting your own way?" Like, you kind of build the muscle, and you have to kind of get confidence. And it starts with, like, this sense of, like, when you're building a business, a coaching business, especially, it's a very intimate experience. It's not like, hey, I'm going to, build this website and I'm going to do this, not to diminish those things, but I'm just saying it's personal.
It's very
It's
personal.
very personal. And so it's a very different experience than most.
Sure. What transformations have you seen, whether it's been with your own life or with a
Yeah.
client's life?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I mean, I would say the ones that are the biggest things are just getting people to live differently, having this sense of, like, feeling like they had to be stuck in certain relationships. And I know I'm not a life coach per se, but, like, when you start to talk to people about, how they're holding themselves back, they start to realize that, hey, I'm stuck in this relationship that is not really serving me. And then they start to change the way that they're thinking about their relationships. And it was kind of like a magnifying effect, that once they got out of this relationship, they realized that they could do other things, and then that starts to kind of lead to another area. So I've seen that happen. I've seen people start businesses where, a biotech professional that I was working with decided, she's like, I think I'm done working in this space, I want to open a flower shop. I was like, what? And we worked together, and we started to think about how she could do this in a way that was really going to light her up. And she did. It was amazing. So, I mean, these types of things happen. It's about really getting intentional and being very clear about what you really want to happen. Just because you've done X for so many years doesn't mean you can't do Y. Anything's possible if you're willing to commit the effort and the time and the energy towards it.
Absolutely. I know one of the things you have shared on your website and Instagram page is the ability to climb the right mountains.
Yes. Well, that's the name of my first book. It's called Climbing the Right Mountain, navigating the journey to an inspired life. And I also climb mountains. I climbed Kilimanjaro last summer, which was really harrowing journey. I think the biggest part of it too is the preparation, is the most fun and fulfilling part too, not just the climb. Um, and the whole idea about climbing mountains is, it's not just the metaphor of climbing mountains, is all about, really thinking about all along the way, how are you checking in and saying, is this the right mountain for me? Am I in the right path for me? Am I defining success for me on my own terms, or am I climbing a mountain that someone else says I should do? Yeah. It should be something that is meaningful to you. And keeping in mind, it's not an easy path. It should never be an easy path. Growth is not, something that's like, oh, that was easy. It should be something that challenges you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's lovely. What value did you get to honor by climbing Mount Kilimanjaro?
Well, first of all, the fact that I could do it because to me personally, I was, I've climbed mountains in the past, but never 19,000 feet. Uh, that was big undertaking. And so for me, just honoring them, that I can set my mind to something and then accomplish it. That was big. Um,
Yeah.
and
Well, I'm
yeah,
impressed by
and
that.
yeah. And just it's little things like that. And people often, we talk about setting a personal vision. You put a personal vision statement for something 3 years in the future, let's call it. And I do that all the time. And then what happens is I look back at them and I'm like, wow, like half those things happened. Some of them even more happened. And some things didn't happen, but it's okay because I can see how the value of creating a vision can put you on the trajectory of what you need to create. Yeah. So if anyone needs a testimonial of how visions work, they do work.
So what do you have planned for 3 years out?
uh, well, thanks for putting me on the spot.
So I'm just wondering, is it Everest or is it something else that
No, I will share with you my vision for the next 3 years is I want to do more um, retreats, experience of getting people together. I want people to come together and connect in experiences like climbing mountains, like being together in inspiring places. So, within 3 years, that's kind of my aspiration is to have sabbatical programs for people to come together and spend time in magical places. So
that's lovely and inspiring.
thank you.
So let me ask you, what do you do if you have a leader and you're coaching them, and this particular client does not want to look at their blind spots? Let's say they are just chasing money really hard. What do you do in those types of situations? Because sometimes there are clients who are going to listen, and there's other times where they just have their priorities set.
Yeah. I'm gonna first of all, I would start with like, how is that working for you? How is that mindset really serving you? What results have you gotten by doing that? And as you look into the future, how do you think continuing on that path is going to help you? Yeah. And if they continue to say, "Oh, don't worry about me, I've got it handled," I'll be like, "Okay, well, let's play this out in a different way. Let's talk about like how other people have reacted to this mindset." Because oftentimes I'm doing 360s with people, and there's input coming from the people around them who are often saying, "Well, this is how I'm experiencing you," right? And if people have that feedback coming into them, you can say that this is who I am, this is how I work. But if everyone else is saying that that's not working, then you have to realize that your environment is what's important. You need to have an environment that supports who you are. And if all you want to do is just continue to churn out and make money, then you better have an environment that supports that. Okay. So
Yeah, thank you. That's kind of a very interesting question because there are some executives and leaders that are placed in those positions as, what I call
yeah,
titans of industry because they're going to get that market share, even if it's at a price to their life and to their health.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I applaud you as many of the coaches out there that do this hard work because it's not always easy to confront someone, especially if it's a tender spot where that's where they get their identity from.
Yeah, and I think one of the methodology I like to call this, and this is something that uh, I say oftentimes to people I coach, is I call it compassionate accountability, because there's a sense of you have to be compassionate about people, holding them in a place of really caring deeply about them, but really having that accountability to you want results. You came to me for results. I'm not going to be here just coddling you and you know filling you up and championing you only. I have to also hold you accountable to the things that are right there in front of you, that you need to get results on. So the
Yes.
accountability part, it's kind of like the two edges of a sword.
Yes. In what ways, and again, this is I appreciate so much I can have a conversation with another coach because again, this is almost like a inside edition. Like what is it like to walk a mile in the steps of a coach, you know, the lifestyle of a coach? What would you say is one of the best investments? Like, let's say you put the contract in front of your client and they're like, wow, look at that price tag. And whether they're kvetching or they're testing, either or, what do you say back to them regarding why coaching is such an amazing investment?
I love this question. And I'm not quite sure exactly the best way to answer it, but I would say the best investment is if you want to really understand yourself and you want to understand your people better, then get somebody who can see you deeply, someone who can help you to catalyze your growth in a way that is fully invested in your growth, in your potential. And so the investment is really about, you having an impact, having fulfillment, and really kind of leading with a purpose that is truly aligned with what you want to create. And that investment, whatever that is going to give you that return. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm sure there have been those moments, especially when you're first starting out, where those hard questions were posed, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
had to kind of field them. And
Exactly. And not everyone is like, well, I don't know, like, can you guarantee results? And I'm like, well, can you guarantee you're going to show up and give your part of the bargain? Because I'm not here to do the work. I'm here to be the person who's going to catalyze this process for you. But the one thing I have to make sure of is that you're willing to show up and do the work as well. So it's important.
yeah, before I transition over to your legacy, one of the sticky situations that isn't talked about often enough is if there's a client and the coach starts to do more of the work. And
Mm.
then, right? Right?
Yeah, yeah. A coaching friend of mine, and I can't remember, where this came from, but it was someone said, never do more work than your client. If you're doing more work than the client, then you're out of balance, and you need to kind of re-engage or recontract. And recontracting is really just about coming back to the table and saying, "Hey, I've noticed this. Let's talk about this." And I think the key thing for me around this is to make sure that you you stop working so hard. You sometimes the best tool that any coach can put into their tool belt is silence. Ask a question, a very simple question like, what's on your mind? And what is the thing that you most want to talk about today? And then let the silence rule.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's brilliant. And sometimes there will be those clients that will be amazing to work with, and there's others that if there isn't a meeting of the minds at the very beginning with the coaching alliance or the coaching contract, then there was never a meeting of the minds at the very beginning, and that just plays out until it's done. And sometimes a client
Yeah.
will test and test and test, and that could be that coaching is new to them, or it could be for a variety of other reasons that you may never even know that's in the background of their life.
Exactly. And that, you might have to check in from time to time on that too. If you're really seeing somebody like canceling meetings, I've had that happen where people have canceled a couple times and I'm like, hey, what's going on? Like, is there something that I need to be aware of? Because, I'm just as I'm invested in you. I want you to be successful, but for some reason you seem to be not as invested. So what's happening? And maybe there is something that needs to be done. Just like if you were, a leader of an organization and your employee stops showing up, you're going to want to know. So the best thing you can do is instead of, immediately putting them on a plan, you're going to ask them like, hey, tell me what's going on. How can I help you? Um, so I think that's the way to approach it.
Yeah, thank you for being candid about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's one of those sticky situations that sometimes coaches have faced. They don't know how to deal with, or they could blame themselves, or it could be something that really just throws a wrench into their confidence if they don't know how to kind of navigate, or if they don't have other coaches or mentors that are part of their support network to say, hey, there are some people that are going to show up and be courageous, and there's other people that are just going to be faint of heart.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah, we have to be just as courageous. Everyone needs to be courageous in their own way. But it takes one moment of just saying to yourself, like, why am I not showing up the way I need to be showing up? Give yourself that the curiosity, and then have the courage. I often say that curiosity is an internal action, and then courage is that external show of that curiosity.
Yeah. One other thing before I ask you about your legacy is it's interesting also, one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough in the coaching walk, the coaching journey, is when a client starts to change, the people around them notice. And that could be a good thing, or it could, right? Right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's great you mentioned that, because it's also a reflection on our own journey as coaches. Sometimes there's a sense of you know the cost of your new life is your old life. Like, when you shift to something different, um you're no longer the same person, and that is okay. But you have to understand that the people around you haven't changed. You have. And what that might mean is that the people who knew you as who you were before, they need some time to adapt to who you are now. That's okay. Um, they may need to adjust and understand, okay, this is someone different now, and who I need to understand better. I need to understand how they've changed, and who they are. And you may have to share a bit about who you are now. And that's
Yes,
okay.
and inviting them in.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they may be able to relate to the new you, or they may be not. And like you had said, there was that one client and he or she started to date someone new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because they may have only known that individual through the lens of comfort.
Exactly. Exactly. And some people are not going to be ready for that at all, period. And that's okay. Sometimes you have to trade off and move into different circles. And it's a bit it's extreme, but sometimes that's just the way it is. Like, if you want to grow, you have to get uncomfortable, and uncomfortable might mean, hey, I've got to move myself into different circles that require different people to be surrounded with.
Yes. Yes. So, how do you fully feel about creating an intentional legacy for yourself? And what is your holistic legacy vision?
Ooh, it's a challenging question, but I'll do my best. So first of all, when I think about my holistic vision of my legacy, I mean, I want to create this feeling that people have been moved or impacted by the conversations we've had. That every time been in conversation with people, that I've left them feeling like they've been opened. Yeah. Oftentimes when I've been in conversation with people, they said that I have this groundedness to me, and that it leaves them feeling a little more inspired, a little more connected to their own well-being. And that's one thing that I want my legacy to be, is a sense of like having people feel a little bit more connected to who they are and who they want to be. And so that's my intention for my legacy, is to have that sense of opening people up to be more connected to themselves and to people around themselves.
Oh, I love that answer. Do you want to know why?
Why?
Because you could have said, I'd like my holistic legacy to be $3.5 million, 5 houses, and 3 cars. And
Yeah.
yet you spoke a spiritual answer for the soul.
Yeah. It definitely is about connection. I want people to feel that there's something that's why my talk I'm doing in a few weeks, my TED talk, is all about connecting deeper as humans, because I feel like there was parts of me who felt like that was missing in my life for a period of time. And even in this current time, we're feeling there's a lot of there's missing connection. And I think for me, I want to continue to be part of a movement to move people towards connecting better as humans.
That's lovely. That's beautiful
Thank
and
you.
courageous. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, not
So,
an easy thing, not a soul. You don't just do it all by yourself.
well, I think an answer like that means that you have dug deep into your soul because that's not necessarily a an, a cookie cutter answer.
No.
So, in addition to the value of dedication and discipline when you
Mhm.
climbed Mount Kilimanjaro,
Yeah.
what other values would you like to honor in defining and developing and executing your legacy?
Yeah. Well, there are a few values that I always come back to. And there's three C's that I'm always thinking about. Curiosity, courage, which is the other C, and then the third one is compassion. And I think I've touched on all three of those in our journey so far. And one of the things about these three C's that is really important to me is that, I think you need them to become grounded in general, to be curious of the people and to be able to connect with other people. You need to have that curiosity, compassion, and courage to be able to open up to other people. So I think those are the three values that I most want to honor at this moment.
Very nice. Curiosity, courage, and compassion.
Yes.
Yeah. And since you're a fellow coach, I can ask this and not feel like I'm being confrontational. How do you get to hold yourself accountable to those values?
Oh my God. I do it daily. I actually have like a daily journaling exercise I do, and I check in myself and I check to see, like, how am I going to be courageous today? How am I going to be compassionate? And how can I be curious today? And I often like find that through that I might have a writing prompt that becomes an article, or it might be something that becomes part of a conversation that I have with a coaching client. So it is a writing journal, a writing prompt every day that challenges me to stay in that place.
You know what would be so interesting, Tony, for your legacy? If you do have a hardcover coffee table book that you share with your parents, and if you have children to pass on then to your beneficiaries,
Mm,
whether they're related or not related, what would be so interesting is if you shared those journal prompts and how
mm,
you lived into your values each week, or if you didn't, and what came up and how you
yeah.
faced it and dealt with it.
Yeah, it's a very vulnerable thing, but yeah, I agree. I mean, there's moments when you're like, oh, it relates to them, sometimes not being able to be fully compassionate for them in certain moments. And then, times when you are fully there for them and they don't really know it. For example, I'll share something that's been present for me. I just finished writing a book, very challenging book that I sent to the publishers a few weeks ago, but it was taking up a lot of my time and effort, and I found that I wasn't really spending a lot of time with my family during that time, and my tensions are running high, so a lot of my journaling prompts were about that, is just kind of like this confrontation and not feeling as compassionate as I could be. So yeah, that was really present for me.
Yeah, and I just want to also add that I think one of the things that's so interesting is our life becomes more meaningful if we can live into our values, but we can
Yeah,
easily forget about it and just go through the motions.
yeah,
And then it
I
feels like a luxury.
I agree. I agree. It's so, I one of the things that comes to mind when you said that, and it's like funny, you just kind of brought that front and center, is that I feel like when we don't align ourselves with those values, we become less attached to ourselves. We become like this person who's just going through the motions. We become, as they say, the reporter as opposed to the author of our days. And I think it's so important to come back in alignment with those things that, once you do, you feel more alive, you feel more fulfilled. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And connected. Thank you for being so transparent.
Of course.
Yes.
I do.
Uh, where have you grown from a year ago to today? And where would you like to grow in the final vision
Yeah.
of your legacy?
From a year ago to today, one of the things that I've really gotten really attuned to in terms of growth wise is, um, at times feeling scarcity show up. you know, I feel like an accordion sometimes. Sometimes it feels really expansive. And then at times you feel really kind of, oh, there's this world is getting smaller. I mean, where are the clients? Where are the things that I need to kind of like tap into new circles? And then, over the past year, I found myself realizing, no, don't let yourself get trapped into that thinking, because you're big enough, you can create. So I expanded again and created more opportunities for myself by, remembering one thing that I always that started my business. I started my business with this quote that says that amateurs compete and professionals create. And so what have I done is I've created um, with others, collaborated. Yeah. I'll say it again because I think it's a powerful quote, that amateurs compete, professionals create. And through that quote, it's really driven me to think, the moment that I feel that things are getting scarce and the competition is fierce, instead I lean into collaborating with others and finding ways to expand the pie.
Oh, I think that's so great. And I would say from a year ago, you could say today that you've got another book coming, you've got your podcast, you've got a TEDx talk
Yeah.
coming up. And a year ago, I would think that those were just maybe ideas either far away or on a bulletin board.
Yeah. I mean, well, the podcast has been around for a bit, but the definitely other things, yes. They've all come a long way.
Yeah. And I know I'm asking you to visualize here, but final day of your life, what does it look like
Uh,
regarding the context of your legacy?
yeah, most people would be like, "Oh, that's kind of kind of morbid," but no, I don't see it that way. I see myself like definitely sitting near the water with some close friends, and really taking in nature and enjoying good conversations, not just like superficial conversations, deep conversations about like things that are meaningful. Maybe reflecting on some of the travels that I've been on throughout the years. That would be my ideal.
Yeah. Do you know what is so cool about that answer?
Tell me.
It honors your value around connection.
Yeah, it does. And one of the values I didn't mention is adventure. And I mean, I've been on a lot of adventures, and I still have a lot of adventures to be had. And uh, I love reflecting on some of the amazing things that I've done with friends and what have you. And just it's great to be able to look back and say, just when you think like, oh, this, things are boring. No, it's been a very full life. Yeah.
Yes. As we come to a close, if there's one message you would like to share with the listeners, what would that one message be? And or you have a choice. Is there a conversation you are holding back?
Ooh, I like that question too. Um, Choices. I would say the message that I would like to share is that if there's one thing that people should do more of is, I say inspiration through honest conversations. So where is it that you need to have a deeper conversation with somebody who you've been holding back? So it's almost like I'm throwing it back at the audience and say, have more meaningful conversations, have an honest conversation with someone who you think is important to you.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. Where's the best place if a listener would like to find you on the internet?
The best place would be my website, inspiredpurposecoach.com. If you go there, you can find links to pretty much everything. I have an assessment tool. I have my books there, and I have my podcasts, so you can find me there.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Tony. I just wanted to acknowledge how vulnerable and real you were in allowing the listeners and the viewers to kind of come into your world and see who you are and what's important in your life journey, also that allowed you to get to where you are today, from that pre-med gentleman, the executive working the finance angles within a corporate job, to then taking that leap of faith because you wanted to grow the different parts of yourself, to now also just being courageous and stepping on a stage. Public speaking is never easy. It's easier for some than others, but it definitely takes that courage that you spoke about, the courage, curiosity, compassion, and being connected to now step onto your future stages, whether that is publishing additional books or just allowing other people to see you more on that world
Mhm.
stage.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you recognizing that. And I gotta also thank you for, just a lovely conversation and such great questions. So thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to read out my paragraph real
Mhm.
quick to close us out. So, in closing, I'm Angelina Carlton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of The Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help you define, develop, and execute your legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're checking us out on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, please remember to rate and review. Or if you're listening on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe. So thank you again for joining us. And thank you, Tony, for speaking into your legacy.
Thank you.